Peterson, Chief Operations Officer at RunWithIt, and I'm joined by Sama, who's our Product Manager and Project Lead, by Myrna, who's our CEO and co-founder, and by George, who is our CRO. So the team is out, which is awesome. And so I'll share my screen, and I will begin by introducing sort of the more general who we are, what we do, how we operate. And then I will turn it over to Sama, who is the technical genius behind the work that we've been doing in the Waterloo region. And she'll share a little bit more about what we've been up to so far in our work in synthetic Waterloo. So thanks so much for joining us, and off we go. I guess I already said this. So I'll begin with the introduction to RunWithIt and to synthetic modeling, what that is and how it works. Then we'll look at the Waterloo region that we've generated and the work that we've done with the Children and Youth Planning Table, looking at the sense of belonging in the region for youth. And then because this just provides such a fantastic example of kind of the more conceptual things that I'll be talking about, to be able to look at how we actually apply this in a real world example. And then at the end, we'll turn it over to Myrna, and she'll present a little bit more about what we've been doing in the Edmonton region, and share some examples and some inspiration for additional work or engagements or ideas that we could implement in Waterloo. So firstly, this is our team. We're a almost 10-year-old company based in Edmonton, but we've got employees across Canada, including in Waterloo. We're a women-led certified Aboriginal business, and we're built on about 25 years of intellectual property and artificial intelligence. That said, we have a very diverse team, and our areas of expertise across the team are quite varied. So we've got all different kinds of engineers. We've got people who specialize in computer science, but we've also got humanities and social science experts that look at human behavior. We've got amazing artists that do 2D and 3D design and motion graphics. And then, of course, business development, data science, finance, sales, operations, the whole gamut. So our conversations get very interesting. And we've been lucky enough to have been recognized over the years a number of times in a number of different contexts. And I really like this slide because A, it allows me to brag, but B, it really shows the breadth and the depth of the sectors and the verticals and the subject matter that we're able to tackle. So we've been active in everything from hydrogen to mobility to utilities, to resilience, equity, and energy transition, to name just a few, and space. Space is always cool. And our most recent award is this Aztec Award in the top right corner, where we won the Alberta Science and Technology Awards, and we were awarded the 2023 Innovation of the Year, actually for our synthetic Edmonton region and the work that we're doing on a region-wide basis here. And Myrna, of course, will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So what really gets us out of the bed every morning is the fact, very simply, that tomorrow is not like yesterday. So everything that we're up to is changing. What cities look like, the nature of urban planning, infrastructure, and prosperity are evolving rapidly. Of course, everything is connected to everything else, which is why we try to think in systems of systems at RunWithIt. And of course, as our weather gets weirder and more wonderful every year, we're reminded that Earth has its own KPIs, and we can't neglect those. So we've put together a set of tools that allow us to think a little bit differently and to look at these systems of systems from a very human-centric angle. So we create or generate geospatially accurate living models of cities and regions complete with people, policy, technology, and infrastructure. So depending on what a given engagement looks like and what it requires of us, we're able to layer on all manner of different aspects into our environment in order to look at how things connect with one another, and what influences what, and what knobs and levers we can turn in order to generate a certain outcome, or what might happen if we turn those knobs and levers in a certain way. So for anybody of around my vintage, I guess, who may have grown up playing SimCity, it's very much like the game SimCity, except for real. So imagine, as a decision maker, having a SimCity that you can basically trial different programming or different policies in before it's actually implemented. One of the things that really sets RunWithIt apart from other companies that do modeling or digital twins is the fact that every environment we generate comes complete with a representative but never identified population. And this population has a complete set of demographics, psychographics, patterns of life. I'm not sure how many data points we usually have associated with a given synthetic individual, but it's often hundreds. And we can do this all from publicly available data. So we don't need any surveillance data, and privacy and confidentiality is never a concern with our populations. And we also focus on inclusivity. So census notoriously misses certain demographics, whether it's children under 5, newcomers to the region, people who don't speak English or French, and we are able to layer in those people. So we like to say that our populations are better than census, and as inclusive as we can possibly make them. And the final point on our populations is that, along with all of the characteristics, each individual synthetic is an AI-enabled entity. So it's actually able to learn and to make decisions, and we are able to survey our populations, which is a really key characteristic, as I hand it over to Sama to talk about the work that we have been doing in the synthetic Waterloo region.
Thank you, Caitlin, and that was a wonderful introduction. I do have the stat in my presentation somewhere, so watch out for that, probably in 4 or 5 slides. So in much the same way that Caitlin mentioned that we create synthetic twins of real cities, we've created synthetic Waterloo region with its 7 municipalities to explore various kinds of what-if scenarios. The work I'm about to present represents everything we've done in phase 1 in our work with the region, which focused on the sense of belonging amongst the youth and measuring it through a wonderful survey that we borrowed from the Children and Youth Planning Table. Okay, so next slide, please, Caitlin. Thank you. So in the first phase, we accomplished 3 goals. The first one was to generate a synthetic population and environment to simulate the Waterloo region that is geospatially accurate and demographically representative and inclusive. And the second one was to survey the full youth population, ages 9 to 18, and quantify their sense of belonging at the individual level, at the municipal level, and in the overall regional level. And the last goal was to prepare this environment and ready it for phase 2, which is going to explore the impacts of subsidized transit for schoolgoers and high school kids. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So a little bit of background to kind of bring you up to speed on how we do this process, how we create a synthetic population. Our work starts, and the first step is to create the synthetic population. So we generate a synthetic population that acts, looks, behaves exactly like the real life counterparts with never identified data. And so the first step is to use open data sources like census and augment it to add invisible populations that census tends to miss, like pregnant women, children under 5 or 10, outdoor workers, so on. And then once we have the people, we carefully group them together into households that are representative of the region in smaller or larger groups. And they have details like married or unmarried couples with or without children, with seniors, single parent households, etc. And then based on their household income or renter owner status or household size, we pair them in the right kinds of residences that they would be living in. And the residences themselves are generated using OpenStreetMap, which is open data set, and tax rolls and zoning data. And these, in our case, were validated against satellite images of the region itself to make sure we had the right kinds of houses in the right places. Last but not least, we added the built environment with businesses, transit stops, bus stations, train, intersections, walkways, parks, natural areas, etc., to complete the region. And when we had it all layered up like a lovely cake, the icing on it was the synthetic survey to measure sense of belonging using raw data that the CYPT shared with us. And then we used that data to train ML models and also used it for validations. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So the synthetic Waterloo region, as I said, is a geospatially accurate, very high fidelity with a lot of detail kind of environment with details right down to the individual person, the family, the residents, and the business. And I wanted to share a few quick facts about the region at its current stage. So we have included all 7 municipalities, 3 cities and 4 townships included. And these consist of approximately 119 census tracts, various dwelling and zoning types, about 300,000 businesses, and over 660,000 people. And each of these people have approximately 130 different demographic and psychographic attributes. And so this I did the math, and comes out to around 95 million plus data points overall. It could very well be a billion. So that's how big our data set is. And the visual to the bottom left, there is a snapshot of the synthetic Waterloo environment we generated for this analysis. And visualized here in particular is our people, individuals by age group. In red, you can see, or orange rather, you can see the youth that are aged between 0 and 18. And this is just our live data environment that we call the RunWithIt holodeck. It's a work in progress in terms of the name, but it's grown on us. If there's any Star Trek fans. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So generating the full population this way of the region gave us the ability to run the CYPT's Youth Impact Survey at 100% response rate. And the youth responding to the surveys have an extraordinary amount of detail on them. They have attributes such as age, race, gender, household income, economic status, even things like homelessness risk, abuse risk, mental and physical health status, disabilities, etc. And in phase 2, we added transit behavior attributes as well, such as motivations and intent to use public transit versus personal vehicles like cars, mobility margins, ability to afford transit, distances to schools and bus stops and stations, etc. And here, you've already played the video, but this video is from the synthetic Waterloo region to give you an idea of the environment we used to analyze the results that we got. And each of those little blue dots and orange dots and green dots that you see are individual people in synthetic Waterloo. And it's really cool because you can zoom in and you can click on the different people and look at their situation and circumstances. And on the right, you see that's something we call a dashboard, where you can see all the different demographic, psychographic attributes of a person that are relevant to the story we're telling. So there's a lot more, but we've cut it down so it's more digestible. Sure, we'll go with that. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So it is very essential for us to establish an accurate baseline youth population in the region to make sure the survey responses are representative. So one of the many validations we conducted was the comparative prevalence of youth ages 0 to 18 in each of the 7 municipalities in the synthetic environment. The lowest percentage of youth appeared to be in the city of Waterloo, whereas the highest were in the townships of Wellesley and Woolwich compared to the rest of the population. And this observation was validated against data reported by the Children and Youth Planning Table. So we knew we were set. Next slide, Caitlin. And with the population ready and validated, it was time to survey them and see what their sense of belonging looked like. So to stay true to the purpose of the survey, we only surveyed youth ages between 9 and 18. And next slide, here we go. All right, so the youth impact survey results that the CYPD shared with us informed the models that measured sense of belonging in our environment. And in the results that the CYPD reported based on a 1.5% response rate, which is a very accurate, sizable, very, very good sample size for this sort of survey. The youth reported 64% strong, 64% of the youth reported a strong sense of belonging in the community. And we received the raw data from the 2023 survey, actually, and used it both in our modeling and for validations. And through analyzing this and augmentation a little bit of the raw data, we were able to extract the results of 100% response rate among the full population ages 12 to 18. Oh, sorry, 9 to 18 in the synthetic region. And I have to say that without CYPT's foundational work with their survey that they did out in the real world, the synthetic survey would not have been possible. So that was very cool. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about what kinds of augmentations we did in the synthetic version of the survey as well. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So when we surveyed the synthetic population at a full 100% response rate, it showed that 45% of the youth in the overall region report a strong or somewhat strong sense of belonging. We surveyed the synthetic population twice, actually, using two different streams of sense of belonging models. So the first one was the machine learning model that we trained on the 2023 survey data. And then the second one was a cluster of fuzzy logic inference engine models based on research. The reason this model was created was so we could inflect different things and measure the impact of these inflections on sense of belonging. Inflections such as more support programs or better access to parks and subsidized transit, which we're looking at in phase 2. The two synthetic surveys actually showed similar results and validated one another. And that was the happy point in my past few months, was when that happened. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So serving the 100% of the youth in that age group was very revealing, and it was very empowering to see the results because we saw a lot of voices that we hadn't heard before. So for example, only 33% of the original survey respondents were boys or people who identify as boys. But now we were able to capture that full group. We got all of them to come in and say what they really felt. And we were also able to capture a wider age range. So before we had gaps in age ranges, but we were able to augment it by hearing from everybody. We also saw a lot of visible minorities responding to the survey and youth who identify as non-binary. And also included were youth in difficult socioeconomic conditions, such as insecure housing, those at high risk of domestic abuse, and more. And it made a significant difference to be able to hear these voices. For example, surveying the full population from the townships and cities confirmed the observation we already knew, that townships on average report a stronger sense of belonging than the 3 cities in the region. Next slide, please, Caitlin. And then looking at the results regionally, the survey revealed that Wilmette and North Dumfries had the strongest average sense of belonging. The weakest was reported in Cambridge and Woolwich, and then Kitchener, Waterloo, and Wellesley fell somewhere in between. We also then looked geographically and analyzed individual sense of belonging, not aggregate, but on the individual level, as shown on this map here on the left, to see where the strongest and weakest belonging live. And red here shows strong, whereas blue shows weaker sense of belonging in this visual. So then in Wilmette, 27% of the youth reported strong belonging, whereas in Woolwich, only 5% reported the same. And amongst those reporting a strong sense of belonging, we did some analysis, and the results highlighted different segments of the population with the highest need for support, such as visible minorities, youth at risk of homelessness, those with disabilities or poor mental health, or those identifying as 2S LGBTQIA. And the reason why is because you can see the percentages of those segments that actually report strong sense of belonging, and they're all below 50%. They're all below half. Characteristically, though, youth with stronger connections to the community can have two-parent families, usually Caucasian ethnically, socioeconomically secure, with good mental and physical health, and usually no disabilities to deal with. On the other end of the spectrum, though, youth in single-parent households, visible minorities or people of color, those with poor mental or physical health, with one or more disabilities, reported generally a weaker sense of belonging. Next slide, please, Caitlin. And so two such kids within the synthetic Waterloo region were picked to show how the youth behind those aggregated statistics look up close when you zoom in. So we have Pierce here on the left. He's from Kitchener. He's 15 years old and living in a household with relatively higher household income, with no disabilities to challenge him that way. And he has a strong sense of belonging, whereas compared to Janaya on the right, a 13-year-old girl living in Cambridge, coming from a single parent home with lower income, living with a physical disability, she has a weaker sense of belonging. All right, next slide, please, Caitlin. So now that we've kind of looked at those results, it's important to understand how we actually measured sense of belonging. So the next couple slides will be about that. To give you an idea of how we did this measurement, I wanted to show you this slide to help connect the underlying real world factors that we saw in the 2021 survey report by the CYPT to the psychographic attributes we actually have in the synthetic environment that give each of these respondents a sense of belonging score. So these factors, these real world factors, were grouped into 3 different categories. For example, environmental score, number 1, factors in things such as opportunities to enjoy nature, environment quality, and ability to take personal responsibility in their own lives. Similarly, social score accounted for factors such as supports from teachers, family support, discrimination faced in school, and more. Respondents with higher scores on all 3 fronts usually had a higher, stronger sense of belonging. Next slide, please. And then just looking at the environmental score and how that looks across the region, this slide was made to give you an idea. So the environmental score affects sense of belonging by way of improved mental and physical health due to better access to nature or parks, for example. This is why it is important to measure this to understand someone's feeling of belonging to their community. So approximately 3% of the youth in the region have exceptionally high scores in areas like Wilmette. Around 30% there have below average scores in the entire region, across the entire region, whereas 5% have very low scores, such as the highlighted areas in Woolwich and Cambridge. This analysis was then repeated for social scores, social and economic scores, but it's not been shown here in the interest of time. And I hope this gives you an understanding of how we quantified sense of belonging from the ground up. Next slide, please. And it gets interesting, and I'm just nearing the end, so bear with me. Okay. So the data we just saw up until now have represented the baseline scenario in synthetic Waterloo. It's a picture of how things are today. Now we'll take a look at what the region could look like when certain policies and programs that affect the sense of belonging among the youth are inflected or changed using knobs and levers that we built into the environment. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So the first thing we changed, the first knob we turned, or the first inflection we made, was increasing the proximity to parks and natural areas and making them more accessible. This impacted the environmental score of each youth respondent, and by 34%. And this happened by way of improved mental health. Simultaneously, we also increased the amount of supports or number of supports from teachers and parents that the youth will have access to. And as expected, this improved their average social score by 16%. And when we look at this impact geographically, it's really fascinating. It's shown on the right, but we'll take a closer look at this impact in the next slide. So when we blow it up, so the baseline scenario is on the left as it is today, and the inflected scenarios on the right. The greatest change in environmental scores was seen in two municipalities, Waterloo and Kitchener, with considerably higher environmental scores compared to before in the baseline scenario. And new activity was seen in Wellesley, here to the top left, which is always exciting because that is a significant impact as well. Wilmot, however, saw the lowest impact. However, it is important to note that Wilmot had the highest score to begin with. So we thought that was very cool. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So looking at sense of belonging, when we've turned all those knobs and levers as a whole, that's what this slide is about. So looking at the overall impact of the inflections on sense of belonging, we begin to really see the story of the region. Some of the greatest impacts were observed in Cambridge with an 8% jump. The lowest impact was seen in Wilmot. So in summary, by increasing access to supports in schools and to parks and recreational areas, the Waterloo region saw a 13% improvement in the overall sense of belonging among the youth. And with that, because we like to save the best for last, I will pass it along to Myrna to share some exciting ideas for the future.
Thanks, Sama. And maybe you can keep sharing your screen and I'll just ask you to advance the slides if that's okay. So hi, everybody. I'm the CEO and co-founder of RunWithIt Synthetics, and really excited to be watching as this emerges. Really looking into this deep dive, as Sama and Caitlin were saying, into the future of youth is now, echoing throughout the presentations and the conference halls and the speaking engagements that I'm involved in. And I think, it is fundamentally, I think, inspiring to other regions. So I just wanted to congratulate the team there that is kicking this off, because now there's all kinds of curiosity that others are having about can we see this in our region, and how do we begin to reach and engage youth. If you want to advance the slide, Sama, I'll talk a little bit about, now that we have a synthetic Waterloo developed. So as you can tell by the first part of Sama's presentation, there's a significant fundamental or foundational effort that goes on to be able to really accurately create this synthetic environment. It's like a digital twin. And, instead of flying planes over and taking images and building a three-dimensional environment that shows the skins on buildings, we use instead our efforts and our process and our technology to really deeply synthesize the people and synthesize them in context of their built environment, as well as the lives and livelihoods that they live and the services that they access and other aspects. And now that we have this foundational piece in place, there's all different kinds of things we can do with it. So the next best thing that we are going to do, I think, that is part of the questions is really all kinds of scenarios around things that have been expressed as being one of the fundamental things that youth have asked for, which is, if we could access more freely education and health and after school services, and how that happens might be through things like changing the economics around transit. So if we inflect free transit, because this is a virtual sandbox, we can do that. Like tomorrow. And then we can dial forward and see just what would the ranges of behavior changes or sense of belonging, or who would that impact and by how much, and is it generating what we need to make a case? Are we sure enough about the results? Do we want to look at or manipulate or inflect the results in a different way? What if it was deeply discounted transit? Who has access to transit? Who doesn't? So who would that, no matter what we inflected in that policy, who would still be left behind? And are there ways we could look at more specific targets or policy targets to reach their access to programming that would encourage their sense of belonging? So I think that's part of the joy of now having this inflectable environment in place, is that we can begin to answer these questions and invite participation and collaboration and disparate views or new research that may come out, or new surveys, or we can foundationally play those through this environment. And then, of course, we exist as a company in many other aspects of regions. So, youth and their families and the generational access, not only around their sense of belonging, but also in the community in terms of building talent and workforce. And I know talent attraction and retention is a huge issue too. There might be aspects of how we could use this environment to tie that youth impact and that sense of community belonging to sense of community opportunity, and then to how that might impact the businesses in the region and the success of the region, all the way through to how we might then reflect that in asks or in advances in the built environment to support that population. Because sometimes even some of the basic math, when we play these things forward, it becomes very apparent where there are gaps or friction or ways that other agencies, around infrastructure and policy and energy and can participate in these environments. Next slide, please. And we have done this in different regions in the country. So really, to take this environment forward, this is an example of what we just won our Innovation of the Year for, was a regional group that got together, initially started out from economic development and a bunch of interested partners who kicked off the same thing that we've done here in Waterloo, so a foundational synthetic environment, but then now are using it for everything from urban planning, land use, energy consumption, transit planning, looking at hydrogen and energy transition and workforce around that industry, post-secondary growth, capacity of campus, pink tax on transit, you name it. We're now able to dial these scenarios forward and really invite an interesting interconnection of policymakers and developers and industry and education. And next slide. I think that's it. We have, I think, ample time for questions if there are any. And we can provide some different examples of how these scenarios are at play, and people who are using synthetic environments in different places in the world too. I've just landed briefly in Edmonton here after a fascinating tour of showing people in the Electric Power Research Institute and all of their membership the future of decentralized energy and in resilience scenarios, where we look at these same vulnerable populations and look for opportunities to make foundational infrastructure changes in communities that relate to resilience. And then we can dial forward and see just what that means and to what families that is most meaningful or impactful for. To everything from the future of electrified transit and mobility and considerations around microgrids as well, and how that gives even remote communities a sense of self-sufficiency and sustainability and health in remote communities. So really, these environments are being used in very diverse ways, but foundationally they are the same. And so it's just a matter of imagination and what is the most priority concerns for the issues that are at hand in the Waterloo region. I wanted to give a special shout out to, because I think he's down below. I invited one of our students. He's a high school student who reached out from the Waterloo region to work with us in his co-op program. And Joshua, I think he's on the line somewhere, but he is the youth that we're speaking to as we're doing this. And I think we had a discussion when we were in Waterloo there last time with him as well, how foundational this is, you know, and seeing this approach and seeing this care and attention and conversation building so that we can look for the outcomes that he's also hopeful for. So he's part of the design team at RunWithIt now, and doing some of the amazing three-dimensional modeling in our holodeck environment. So welcome, Josh, and I'll turn it over to questions now.
So I have a quick question. Excellent presentation, and you got my mind going in a whole bunch of different directions. I work with our local community foundation. So Allison shared a bit of this with me and got me thinking through it. Talk to me a little bit about, and maybe it's you, Sama, in terms of, you talk about being able to augment some of the publicly available data, and you talk about being able to pull broader than census and some of that information. When we've been creating research and we're working with a variety of folks, they've said to us there's an absence of some of the data around individuals who are racialized or individuals who have different lived experiences. And I just wonder, how are you able to fill in those gaps that others can't fill in? And that would just help me in terms of framing a little bit. If you could add to that just a bit for me, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually we start with census and then we notice all these gaps. So we go out and we have an incredible research team who grab all sorts of reports and surveys and research from in and around the region. And sometimes when the region doesn't have data, we look towards regions that are similar by characteristic and demographically similar. And we fill in those data sets using either raw data or we do synthetic modeling to fill in those gaps and say, okay, now do we have the full population? And then we go out and validate and look at the region and see where the exact gaps that we have filled are. So we have a list of things where, hey, in census, these people were missing, in certain census tracts, people were missing. But then we actually go onto Google Earth and look at where there's houses and where's their schools. And so there's different sources we're able to use and integrate all of that with our data layering and merging. And that makes it a powerful tool for that kind of inclusive picture that you might want to see.
And I think that's really an important question, and a question that many have, because they are struggling to find those missing populations and that information. And whereas in the past and still, you know, we are excluding those groups in many policy discussions because we don't have the data from them. We haven't collected it, or they have been unwilling to give it, or we haven't found a mechanism to invite them to participate that they feel comfortable with, or there's data sovereignty issues in different First Nations, for example. We still want to provide an avenue for them to be considered in this discussion. And so we do our very utmost to be able to characterize if there is information that comes in that that says, no, the distribution is like this, or this population. We absolutely welcome that refinement at any point in time. But we still believe that it's more important to be able to go out and use every bit of intelligence that's out there to make sure they're included in the conversation the best we can. Is there any other questions? Oh, Barb has.
Hello, thank you for the really interesting presentation. Wondering if you've done any work in the early years, and if so, can you tell me a little bit about, you know, with other communities, what that involved or what you were looking at?
Sure. So in the early years of RunWithIt,
Sorry. No, in the early, sorry, I'm speaking my sector language. So in children, like any work around work with children in the early years. So work for children 0 to 6 and I think you call them interflections of how the early years might be impacted.
I'll let Salma answer that question.
Thank
In
you.
terms of the Waterloo model, I'm not sure how young. Did we start at age 9?
We have the full population, but we conducted the analysis to show the results of only 9 to 18.
Right. But you could, so if like we do have data that we could, so you could incorporate the data that we have for 0 to 6, or well, what we have is probably mostly 0 to 6 data that could be used. Yeah, okay. But no other communities have looked at this at that age group yet? No, okay. Or anything in that area. Okay, thank you.
And that's why we're so excited about this project, is because, you know, we had just entered into youth kind of with the United Way, and really been able to look at access to programs, a very specific group of 5 programs that they're offering consolidated in schools. And when Waterloo came on our radar, and so we think that this is just an amazing opportunity to expand this understanding, and I think even that 0 to 6 is something that people need to think about, because this is the world we're building for them. Yeah. Dan.
Hi, yeah, fascinating to dig into this, and thanks for sharing. I'm interested in the role of AI versus basic calculations and computing. You know, what is that interplay? Where does AI come into it versus just saying, well, this is the proportion, you know, for this question and this question, you know, things that any statistician would do versus what AI will kind of assume and learn and create new data. So interested to hear about the interplay of when it's one and when it's the other.
So I'll take a stab at answering that question, even though I'm not the technical expert, and Salma, feel free to jump in. We use AI in a variety of different ways. We entirely live in the world of generative AI, but not in the traditional sense. So we don't give it a data set and say, go away and learn things, and then black box make things happen, and then we'll all watch. We're very much human in the loop. So we use AI and neural nets and filtration as a part of our synthetic surveys, and we validate. So, you know, we have a technique of being able to tie to demographic characteristics and attributes and everything, those surveys to an entirely and never identified or surveyed population in the region. So that's one of the places we use artificial intelligence. Another places we also have our models live in an interconnected environment, and they intersect and relate. The way they're described, that's all explainable and manipulatable, so it's not black box AI. We can go in and change any one of those models or those distributions, or we have a whole model catalog that describes different models and the way they work, and then we interconnect them. But then we also have synthetic entities, which are living, reactive, responsive, context-aware individuals in that environment. And they intersect with those models as well. So they respond and react to things like when we change the modeled environment, like transit, those individuals then say, you know, well, I'm more likely or less likely to be able to use transit, or it doesn't matter if transit is free because I have access issues, and I live here where there is no transit, so it doesn't make a difference for me. And they make their decisions based on, and we can ask them their decisions, and they'll tell us why they're making their decisions, and we can validate. But the difference between this and a statistical environment is that we can watch emergent behavior happen. So statistical environments, oftentimes they're very described, and they're looking at distributions, or they run mathematical simulations, and they have a limited amount of variables that they can change or manipulate, but it's described by an equation. When we have a synthetic population, it's not described by equations. It's described by interconnections and reactions and responses, of which we can observe, analyze, disagree with, change if we believe that that's not a real result that we're seeing. And so that's, we're very much human in the loop and explainable AI, and we use it so that we can accomplish things on such scale, if that makes sense. And Sama, did I forget anything? Because Sama lives in that world as well.
I came up from the ground today to meet y'all, but then I'll just dive back in when I'm done.
Yeah.
But that was a great answer, Myrna. Just wanted to tell you, Dan, that we have machine learning models are just a part of our model type. We also have calculations, fuzzy logic, stochastics, relational, mathematics, just a lot of different models come together, and it just depends. Are you calculating GHG? Sure, use a calculation model, but are you modeling sentiment? Use an inference fuzzy mix. So because people aren't 2 + 2 = 4, I don't know math, but I think it's supposed to be 4, but that's not how people work. So what I'm trying to say is it's a whole mix, and that's what gives it the nuance. So it's not just kind of one way of thinking, it's dependent and nuanced around what things would look like in real life.
So people can tell me to stop. I'll just keep asking questions until, so as I'm working this through, there's a framework that EDC locally and the region, et cetera, helped us formulate. Can you, and this may be out of scope for this conversation, and you can tell me it's out of scope, but can you walk me through, say there was another problem within Waterloo region that we wanted to tackle that was beyond the scope of this amazing problem that's already being tackled. So not taking away from this amazing issue and how it's going to impact, and that in and of itself is extremely exciting. But what is a process if you've got this basic structure that has been gifted to us, I would say, in the community in terms of a start, and then community-wise thinking through, might there be some other applications that would intersect with this, but also could stand on their own?
Yes. So that's an amazing question, Lynn, and one that we are kind of learning as we go, as we have some of these other regional environments in place. So we started off in the Edmonton region, so a metropolitan region that includes 14 different cities and counties, rural municipalities even, and we built a synthetic region kicked off by their economic development agency. That they were wondering about hydrogen transition and project phasing and workforce blending, hydrogen demand side economy from fleets. And that's where it started. So they asked us all of those questions, and we modeled out and delivered their analytics and their presentations and to different audiences, which they used around the world for investment attraction and local kind of conversations as well. But then we began to get the, well, we're going to grow by 1 million people questions. And do we have our built environment right? And do we have our growth plan? And what's the cost of shared services going to look like if we continue at this density? And is housing going to be affordable? Are we going to have our water treatment plants in the right place? How are people going to consume energy when they electrify? So all of these questions have now grown the same group of people who are using this model, and departments, sectors, and each one gets to participate. And oftentimes we're dealing with really unique questions where they want to ingest their strategic answers first. But they ask a question and their models intersect with everybody else's that they've developed. And so they get adjacent answers as well. So everything's interconnected. So you pull one string and it impacts everybody else. And they are now beginning to share these. So we're having quarterly meetings where we share results from the different strings that have been pulled when they want to share them with what that impact is on adjacent agencies, on united concerns. So we're looking at the last meeting we had was all about energy and energy affordability, energy burden, energy resilience, connected care and aging in place and its ties to energy. So they're all now beginning to coalesce around. We can actually see the same, region, the same Waterloo region, but ask our unique questions, get very unique answers, but we know that they're all connected to everybody else's, development in the region as well. So it's a really unique way of bringing those diverse community members together, I think. And it just builds, the region builds. The more really unique questions, like, I'm sure the energy community would be very interested in how, energy affordability or reliability will impact people with kids 0 to 6. Because there is a profound impact for health events during acute and chronic climate change in regions for people with young families. And so now we get to show them that, once we've developed that population, and they then get to consider that when they're making energy policy.
Very helpful, thanks.
Yeah.
We're actually currently working on measuring the risk of cold or hypothermia in households who don't have proper insulations, residential buildings that have been made in the 1980s with poor insulation. And when you live somewhere like in Alaska, and how cold it is for how much of the year, and when you're elderly or you're a child and then even between genders, there's that heat regulation difference biologically. And so who gets cold first? Who needs that energy resilience? We're currently doing a lot of work around that with the national labs.
And then what the retrofit policies for changing building envelopes or adding access to air conditioning or heat pumps, who has access to those? If they're renters, likely not. And what do those policy choices mean for all the way through to those resilience scenarios when you have little kids who are cold? Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
Hello. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Thank you so much for the wonderful work. Again, sorry for my voice. It's still, I'm carrying symptoms from my flu. So wonderful work, and thank you so much for your wonderful team. So the most interesting one, I think, for me was the environmental score. It was fantastic. So I was wondering how this assessment has taken place when we are talking about townships. So we know that people there have better access, of course, to natural environment. So I was wondering, have you just looked at the parks, which is kind of artificial, and the facilities there? So because I noticed that in one township that I think it was Wilmot, so you had very dominant increase in the belonging sense when you increase, I think, parks. So I was wondering how you have looked at it when it comes to environments. Did you increase the environment score in general, you mean the greenery, or it was just parks?
So we used OpenStreetMap data to find the park locations in the region, and kind of looked at what the average child or in different municipalities how far away, what was their proximity already. And then we inflected it so that the proximity was either within walking distance or within a distance of, now that we have bus stops, that range just increases. So looking at what easier access looks like and who it impacts, and it doesn't impact everyone the same way. We were in that slide deck. In that slide, we were looking at the aggregate results. But the fact was, when we looked at all of the results of everybody, they were really impacted. There were kids who couldn't walk to a place before because they maybe had a mobility margin, maybe are living with a disability where they can't walk that far. So it makes a huge difference for a lot of the kids, especially with subsidized transit as well. So those were kinds of some of the flavors of how we did the environmental score. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, so actually, you looked at the proximity and the availability of parks, right? Not like a natural greenery. Okay, it was wonderful. And another question, actually, it is combined question. So one is about is there any concern about making the individuals, the one that were popping out of the map, anonymous? Are they anonymous, or is it the random names that you are giving, or
We gave them all random names.
Oh, okay.
We gave
Okay,
them all
great.
names because it humanizes our synthetics, and they're random names. They're never identified populations that have been generated. So, but yes, they're random names.
It is wonderful. And yes, please.
Oh, sorry, the names do come from the Waterloo region. We get popular lists of popular names. Who gets that fantastic job? Oh my gosh, Dean does a lot of that, and then the data science team, they get the data for us, and they're like, oh, okay, this is the list we go with today.
And then we get attached to certain synthetics, and then when we generate the population again and they're not there, it's sad. We search for them by name and they've moved, or anyways.
It's wonderful, fantastic. And may I ask, what is the vision? What are you saying? Like, what is the next step in your process? So are you gonna make it public? Like, what is the next step?
We're coming to Waterloo on the 20th.
Okay.
We have a day of meetings,
Yeah.
and then we have presentations to the children, youth, and planning team there. But we're open to ideas. So, we know what other regions and how they wanted to step into this, and so we're wanting to find out how the Waterloo region would like to step into this, and whether or not they would like to make it public, whether or not there is a opportunity to build an engagement side that directly invites youth into the planning of their city, or whether this is a industry wants to get involved, or we're involved with some post-secondaries elsewhere too, who are asking very specific questions to then take to Ottawa for some policy changes and considerations. So it's how the region wants to consume this. Where our door is open, and we're excited.
Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you so much.
Go ahead, George.
Yeah, sorry. I would also say that I'm sure you are taking away from the presentation today how this might fit with your own particular, requirements or particular, purview of programs and or deliverables into the marketplace or into the population. We are more than open to having one-on-one conversations as well with you if you so choose to do so. Just please contact any of us from RWI. We'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have some time left on Monday, November 20th. So if anyone is around and would like to meet and have a chat, we're absolutely open to that. If that day doesn't work for you, we Zoom like champions. So we're happy to talk anytime. And we would love to get to know more people in the Waterloo region.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I've thrown into the chat the link to the forum event if you haven't registered already, where you'll get to see the Run With It folks in real life, in person, demoing this question on free transit ridership for high school age youth. Caitlin, maybe if you share your email in the chat, that would be great if people want to reach out to connect on a one-on-one. But otherwise, hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk to you all later.
Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. We'll end the recording.
Thank you so much, Allison.
Yeah.